Okay, everybody, welcome to this special meeting of Adult Select Committee. What we'll do is, first of all, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Pratt.
Thanks. Declarations of interest, as and when, do you think? Yeah. We'll just do a round of introductions just for people who are viewing in. Might as well start with Richard.
I'm Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Debbie Blakeborough, Chair of Adult Select.
Councillor Louise Brown, Vice Chair of Adult Select.
Eve Parkinson, Head of Adult Services.
Julie Boothroyd, Chief Officer, Social Care, Safeguarding and Health.
Colin Richings, Integrated Service Manager for North Monmouthshire.
Shirley Wigham, Housing.
Mark Hand, Head of Planning, Housing and Place Shaping.
Shirley Woodhouse, Member for Grovefield Ward in Abergavenny, Member of this committee.
Good morning, County Councillor Ruth Edwards, elected Member for Lentilio Cresceni and a Member of the Adult Select Committee.
Councillor Roger Harris, Member for Cresson Ward in Abergavenny and Member of this committee.
County Councillor Lisa Dimmock, Member of this committee, and County Councillor for the Elms ND.
County Councillor Paul Pavia, Member of Larkfield, Chepstow, and a Member of this committee.
Thanks, everybody. So the first item on the agenda is Crick Road Care Home. So this is the development of a new home, a new idea. And just to remind members of the journey in terms of this project, it came to Adult Select and Cabinet round about this time last year, really, and it was agreed that it would go from a feasibility study or feasibility phase to the design and detail case phase, which is where we're at now. And I think what we're looking today is to agree or endorse for this to move from design phase to implementation phase for when it goes to full council on the 20th of December. Yes, yeah, because it's been moved from the 13th. And to, I guess, to endorse and agree funding, capital funding for this to take place. Members have had a seminar earlier this month where it was looked into great detail. There were a few questions and some questions that we want to kind of take forward today in this session. When looking through the report, because it is about reasons for change, and we had a discussion, and just correct me if I've got this wrong, but this is my understanding. There seems to be kind of 4 pillars to this change. It's the positioning of the building, because it's around having community integration and shared spaces. It's about the design and layout, because that's new and innovative. There's the model of care, and you talk about the relationship-based approach to holistic care. And what I like is this kind of principle, which is we are with people and not doing to or for people, which is very empowering sort of statement. That's kind of the principles and culture around that. So we got position, the design, the model of care, and then also the staffing structure, because that's new and different. And it's more of a generic roles, a amalgamated household support model. So we might have to sort of explain that a little bit to us. And then the foundation then for us to look at is the funding and ensuring that we do have enough money for this to go forward. And out of that, I think it's looking at the county as a whole, because this is an innovative flagship model, but what about the rest of the county? And I know Roger Harris particularly has got questions around that. So that's setting the scene, I think. So open to questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that it's a question. Just from when we had the presentation a few weeks ago, and we can see the model there now, and to my mind, this is a very impressive project. As far as I'm concerned, it's got my wholehearted support, and I would particularly say, as I said then, we're talking about a 32-bed unit, but maybe the possibility of turning it into a 48-bed unit. If we miss this opportunity, it will be a tragedy. And if we haven't got sufficient funds to make sure that it is a 48-bed community, we discussed the fact that there are other organisations out there that probably will chop our hands off to get anywhere near this facility. So, to my mind, we need to move every possible opportunity, A, to get this built, B, to make it a 48 bed unit and explore all the possibilities of other organisations coming in and participating to enhance it, as opposed to just being bolt-ons, and basically that's really all I've got to say. You know, this will obviously come to the planning committee once we've made our minds up, and then you know, from seeing the modular units there actually demonstrated in front of us, it gives the impression of being like living in a house, I suppose, as to an institution. And the amount of thought that's gone into it, I think, is impressive. And I, for one, will support it wholeheartedly. So I haven't got any questions, but that's just the way I feel about it. Thank you, Chair.
Roger, is there a question in there about turning from 32 bed to 48 bed? Is there a question in that?
Well, you know, to my mind, there should be no doubt about it. It should be a 48 bed unit, and we need to explore every possible opportunity, as I've mentioned, even with external organisations, to make sure that we can have that sort of facility within the county.
Thank you, Roger. We had a conversation about this in the member seminar, and I think it was really a real heartfelt plea, I think, from the people who were there to say, actually, this could be a missed opportunity. I think in terms of what we're considering today, it's the re-provision of Severnview, which currently stands at 32 beds, and I think we explained that we have the revenue funding for a staffing model around 32. But again, like you've said, the opportunity exists while we're going through the phases of planning to consider actually a further 16 beds on top of the building that we're proposing to build. There are conversations that are beginning to emerge around that, and Colin may be able to give us a bit of an update on that. But certainly we explained to members that certainly from a ABUHB perspective, we were trying to forward those conversations. And also with other partner organisations, one that we discussed was St David's, again, early conversations. But actually, you know, this is even though we're here to consider the next phase of development through to council, we're talking about potentially the next 3 years. So we have got opportunity. It isn't and we're really keen to explore that. So I want people to understand that isn't, you know, that's going to be something that we will come back to, I'm sure. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else, Colin.
Yeah, I think the support of elected members is critically important. And I took away from the member seminar on the 8th that drive to pursue as far as possible the option for 48 beds. There are a number of meetings scheduled. I have one this week with Emma Sasel, the Chief Exec of St David's. These are preliminary meetings, but I know that she's very interested in pursuing a partnership. And I think it's a great opportunity for Monmouthshire County Council to partner with third sector and private sector organisations to show that cooperation and partnership. It's about keeping the door open as long as possible as we go through the phase. So I met with a member of Mark's team, Joe Draper, last week, and we've agreed that we're going to pursue 2 planning applications to keep it open as long as possible. So there'll be 2 separate applications coming in for detailed planning. And we will work very hard to pursue those options. I know Julie's been speaking to the chief exec of the health board, and we hope to pursue that. So we will drive very hard to get it, because I completely agree. There is a sense of a lost opportunity. The capital funding is a challenge, but it's not a bigger challenge as the revenue funding, and it's securing that revenue funding that's going to be the main barrier. Yes. But,
The other thing that I was slightly concerned about, I think it's in this report as well, is we're talking about a potential of £700,000 for the Seven View site. Yeah, it's got to be worth, it must be worth much more than that. I hope so, in any case.
I think we're trying to be prudent in our costings and our budget planning. So we have gone the lower end of the valuation, and we had a valuation in November last year. So we will have another one now, and then another one at the point of sale. So I'm hoping that it will go up, but I think it's prudent that we use lower end figures rather than higher end at this stage.
Wait till the bridge stops coming.
Councillor Pavia.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to follow on that thread really, and it's probably for Julie in terms of discussions with the LHB. What sort of in terms of those discussions, is it for CHC beds, for a certain amount of beds, occupancy over a period of time? Just be interested to understand some of that.
It's interesting. We've had a number of conversations. We've had some conversations locally in what we call our Integrated Service Partnership Board, more about concept than about where can we look to partner. I'm pursuing conversations at a more senior level to say what is the opportunity and appetite for this. Given the situation that we have at the moment as we emerge into the winter again, the opportunity for us to have some flexible use of some beds, particularly to promote discharge. We've talked about a range of different options for those beds. End-of-life care, particularly, as a sort of potential follow-on from the Seven View site, but equally people coming into an end-of-life type provision. We've talked about what we call step-up, step-down beds, which, is that opportunity. I think there's a lot of discussions that need to take place about, it could be a range of things. The conversations that are happening with St David's are one set of conversations, and I think we've got to pursue with the health board other conversations. I suppose the tricky bit is nobody's got any money, and that at this time trying to have those conversations about what's possible. But I think we need to really look to the future and say what is the build, if you like, that we need to be able to support people in that part of the county. So we've got to have these conversations. I don't know what the outcome will be, but certainly we'll be having those conversations.
Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very supportive of this project, and I think it's an extremely good idea in terms of the care that it provides. But I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle, from a sort of a practical perspective. When I was a county councillor in another authority, I had to spend 2 or 3 years trying to negotiate with the care home and also the council so that they could have extra car parking facilities, because basically what happened was in the street nearby, basically opposite the care home, drives of residents were being blocked and buses couldn't get through because of the parking round the care home. And I was a bit concerned when I had your response to say that, we've asked staff to share cars or bike there or whatever. I don't think it's really practical not to allow in the design for car parking spaces, because the care home wants to be integrated within the local community. And if you create a situation by the design of creating, I mean, I couldn't believe the antagonism on a daily basis that occurred between residents and the care home because of this parking irritation where they couldn't get out of their drives and so forth. Now, the problem is that it's a good idea to have it integrated and to have the houses all round about, but it's designed on the basis of the manual of streets. Now, I've seen new estates designed on the basis of the manual of streets, and what this means is that the roads aren't wide enough to allow cars to park on either side and to pass by. They are very narrow, and it ends up with cars half on the pavement and half on the road. And it creates a lot of issues. The other issue is not just car parking in relation to the site itself, but the second issue is public transport to get there, because there seems to have been no consideration at all about public transport. Now, the Seven View home at the moment is close to the centre of Chepstow, and I know people who've had relatives in there who are able to, without using a car, walk to the facility. Now, there is a very steep slope downwards, which obviously causes, you know, problems with wheelchairs and so forth. And, you know, the parking is actually on a slope, but it is accessible without having to have a vehicle there. But there are parking spaces there, and to allow no parking at all, I think is a recipe for having difficulty of this project integrating with the local community, with housing roundabout. And I really think it took me 2 or 3 years of negotiation between the council and the care home in this particular location to try and let the council have a bit of their land and the care home to pay for the car park, to alleviate this issue that was a constant daily issue, and it was threatening the local shops because people were parking in the car park near the local shops, which was it was a deprived area, and it had council ex-council properties as well, and you wanted to retain the local shops. So there was all sorts of implications of the lack of parking. In terms of public transport, the site is located within, the centre of the development to integrate it more. But again, you know, will buses on a manual of streets with narrow streets be able to negotiate their way through parked cars on in the street itself? And, you know, how are you going to get visitors and the residents and the staff to actually go there? Now, on a cold morning like this, I can't necessarily see the staff cycling there, and I think you've got to really be realistic about this particular issue, and also how are you going to do this transport issue as well? You know, I mean, it is a concern because there isn't a bus route at the moment, and even if there is a bus route, and this is an issue I raised at planning because I was really concerned about this, is the bus stops are going to be located on either side on a main road. They're going to be basically next to a grass verge. Now, you've got elderly people, even if they can walk from that bus stop to where the site is located, which isn't next to the main road, you know, there's a risk of them slipping and falling on those grassed areas. And I don't think the whole area of car parking and public transport and getting people to and from that site has been properly considered. And that was partially the reason why I did ask for the planning application originally to be deferred on highways grounds. It wasn't just concerned about the Crick Road being very narrow entrance. It was this issue of getting to and from the site. And I know it was poo-hooed when I mentioned it before, not by you, but by another member, on the grounds that, you know, well, Seven View is difficult in terms of access because it's on a slope, but at least it is walkable within from the town centre of Chepstow. And what you've got at the moment is an inaccessible site, which will probably cause a potential of considerable parking and access difficulties. And I think this is an area that hasn't been thoroughly thought out. Thank you.
Colin, do you want to come back on that? So it's public transport and car parking. And would Mark want to come in on that as well? I don't know. Just because it's a planning-y thing, that's all. Sorry, Colin. Thanks.
I was only going to say, Chair, all we've considered at the moment via planning committee is the outline planning consents. So the detailed stage is yet to come. We'll go through pre-application discussions with Julie's team as a normal applicant in the normal way, and look at these details. I don't really want to rehash the debate from planning committee. My understanding was the bus stops are on the B road. The bus won't be going through the site itself, but I've noted down that we need to look at how you get from the bus stops into the site. So we'll look at all of that at the detailed application stage.
Yeah, the issues of public transport are, very relevant to all the staff and to the residents' families, and it has been raised in discussions with families. So it's very much on our mind to understand what the wider site infrastructure is in terms of public transport. And the ideal for us would be that a bus does run through the site, allowing for the, ease of access. But certainly, it's critical for us as we go through the planning phase, as Mark says, that transport is a key consideration. In terms of the car park, I think currently, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I think there are 22 spaces allocated for car parking. In terms of developing an innovative design, I think there are always a number of tensions that have got to be played out. Every space that I give for a car parking space is area that I can't give over to the residents, and I'm trying to maximise the communal and recreational spaces for the residents. So at this stage, I suppose what I'm saying is that tension has got to be played out. Now, in terms of how I've clearly got to meet the minimum car parking requirements as set out, and I think that's one place for 3 non-resident staff and one place for each resident staff, and then one place per every 4 residents for visitors. And given that there will be up to 20 staff on site, 8 places for visitors, and then 1 resident member of staff, we are within that. But I have to acknowledge that the parking at Seven View, which has more spaces than currently, although it has a day centre based there, so that adds to, and it's also used by members of the public who are accessing Chepstow Town. So there are a number of tensions there. But that car park is always full. So I'm not, innocently going, oh, it's enough spaces. I know that there will be tension in that, but I think part of the development phase is on me as the project lead to fully explore the maximisation of space for residents. And as part of that, I will be talking and have spoken to the teams about the need to look at alternatives to each member of staff bringing a car in. If there are 4 members of staff in each household, that's 16 members of staff who are on the same shift. So they're coming at the same time and leaving at the same time. So in essence, they're not dynamic parking spaces. Lots, in terms of locality, more people live in the Portskeut and Caldecott area than do in the Chepstow area currently. So it's more local for people, and people are receptive to car sharing. And when we talked about using the day centre bus or one of the shared vehicles to do a kind of park and ride in the morning, or just to pick up people, they were very receptive to that. So I completely accept that I've got to resolve the parking as part of the detailed planning phase, but I do want to pursue the option of maximising opportunities to avoid people bringing their cars to work. So, and I think I know that that's a tension, and I know that that's an issue, but I'd like the time over the next sort of, before we go into detailed planning, to sort of work hard to resolve that tension and get the right balance between sufficient car parking and maximising recreational space.
Yeah, I certainly think it's an issue that needs to be looked at, and obviously the other issue is the public transport issue, because obviously you know, whether or not staff or residents or visitors can car share, you know, obviously if there isn't actual door-to-door public transport to where the site is, or a bus stop nearby, then you know, you are also limiting another aspect of travel to the site, which you know, is there. You know, I appreciate Seven View isn't ideal because of the steep slope, but I mean, there is the facility to be able to walk from the centre of Chepstow, and everybody can get to the centre of Chepstow, whether or not they have public transport or not. So I think it is an issue, and I think the manual of streets is also an issue to consider, because of you know, how wide the streets are for buses and so forth, and getting through. And I personally don't like the manual of streets, because I think it provides obviously more houses per site, but it also doesn't give a wide enough road. Thank you.
Thanks for that, please. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I think, as Mark explained, a lot of this now will come before planning, and I think a lot of it's been thrashed out this morning, so I think we'll all have a lot to think about. But yes, access is going to be crucial, but obviously the residents themselves, most of them will not. Excuse me, I've had this horrendous virus, but that's why I wasn't at the last meeting, that they will not be driving, but I don't know if there's going to be any time specific for visiting or whatever. But also we have to be fairly open-minded when we're saying over 65 of dementia, because we do get early onset, don't we, as well? And you can't really sort of put a benchmark as to how long some of them are going to be in residence, and we are thinking of end of life, as what Julie says, so that they would stay in that environment and not be moved somewhere else, which is crucial. And people with dementia, they can fluctuate from day to day into where they are or what they perceive is around them. And reading it last night on some of it, where it says what we do for people, not what we do to people, which is crucial, and not to, when you enter, that it's going to be like a hotel or a reception. But what I did think was very missing in there is people with dementia very often relate to pets, like a cat or something like that. And I thought that was very homely thinking, domestic feeling, because they can relate to something like that more so than perhaps a person and staff that come and go, that a cat, if it was there. I mean, this is really off the wall now, but I've seen that with dementia people where they will relate to a pet and give them stability in their surroundings. So anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Yeah, it's pets are incredibly important, and yes, they will feature. They do at the moment. We just have a single cat at the moment with Seven View who will move. But there's some very... the three of us have all read a really brilliant book by somebody called Atul Gawande called Being Mortal. And he talks about some experiments in America in residential care where they gave each of the residents a bird to look after. And the results were fantastic. And there's this sort of higher level of, we talk about self-actualization and people's emotional and social needs, but the highest need is one of contribution and caring for others. And it's that we're trying to address. So if we can create opportunities for people to care for others and not just be cared for, that takes the sort of care environment to a next level. And pets is critical. I often have a number of conversations with Sian Gardner, who's the lead for residential services, and she would like all manner of animals to be both at Seven View and on the new site. So it will be a lively debate going forward, but we very much do see it as a serious element of care and will be incorporated.
Any other questions? We've got Roger and then we've got Paul Pavier.
Thank you, Chair. It's a simple question. Will there be specific visiting hours, i.e. from 5 to 6 or whatever, or will it be open? Because that makes an awful lot of difference on parking facilities.
Absolutely no visiting hours. So I think that's underlined in the report. I set out this sense of creating expectation of families and friends. And there is, again, a tension when people move into permanent care that some of their role is lost in being the carer, and they don't understand their role necessarily in when somebody moves into residential care. And I think the way to address that is to create this sense of expectation that the things that you did to support your loved one before going into care, you should carry on, but that you are as much a member of the household as the resident themselves. So I would expect families to feel free to come to help at breakfast, to help through the day, to do whatever it is they feel. And I think creating arbitrary barriers to that, such as please do not visit between these times, is a problem. So we need to get rid of visiting times altogether. We do have, and it's something I disagree with, there is an element of we ask people not to visit during meal times currently, and I don't personally understand that. There is a sense of there's an awful lot going on at that point, so it adds to the volume of people, but it's not something I would see in this new home.
Paul Pavier and then Councillor Woodhouse.
Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of exploring some of the funding elements, obviously there was integrated care funding to develop the concept. You know, a huge slug of this money for the project is going to be ICF funding. Is it ICF or is it transformation funding? It's definitely ICF. And in terms of sort of principle or agreement in principle, is that bid gone in? Is that money that is secured? Is there?
So I think there have been about 6 or 7 hoops that the money's had to go through. So I sat as part of a regional partnership bidding process that looked at all the bids for ICF Capital across Gwent. It then went into Welsh Government, and there's been a number of committees that have looked at that. It's now sat on the Minister's desk with a recommendation for signing. We were hoping we might have heard, I don't know, a week or so ago, actually. I think when we came into the members' seminar, we were giving the same message. I think it is a matter of it being signed. All the requisite recommendations and toing and froing have been done. It's sat with the other bids that hopefully are going to be signed off imminently.
Okay, so that potentially, I'm just thinking, obviously politically playing out with leadership election and potentially a new cabinet secretary, which I anticipate that happening. If there was a delay of a few months, would that cause a problem?
One of the time parameters that we have around the funding for ICF is that it has to be spent in year. So we've profiled that the land purchase, subject to all the other caveats around planning, around permission giving, has to be, we have to spend in effect £1 million of that capital money by the 31st of March. So if that gets put off, in this first year, it probably isn't too much of a worry as long as we can, get our end of that chain in place by the end of March. But obviously that's subject to other factors as well. The whole site being sold off, if you like. Clearly, it could have an impact, but we are imminently told that we're going to hear, and it's a big scheme of money over 3 years. So I'm hopeful that politically that's just going to be, you know, we've done all the work. They're not going to ask us to redo that, I wouldn't think. But yeah, you're right, you know, there's clearly other things on their mind at the moment.
And if I come back with a sort of a second question, just, you know, it is an innovative model, obviously, in terms of how the models develop with the workforce is going to, I assume, change. How is that going to look? I know you've obviously worked this up with the current staff at Seven View. You know, I'm sure there'll be issues with some people wanting to perhaps transfer over and work, but you know, this is going to require very different skill sets, perhaps retraining, a new training, integrated working with perhaps you know, obviously health and social care. So you might see a mix, you know, certainly mixed dynamic there. So I'd be interested just to unpick a little bit of that if I could.
I think the critical bit is that the staffing model is co-produced. And if it's to be genuine consultation with the staff team, then it has to be able to change. So I've put forward what I think is the ideal model and what I would like to see happen. I think there's a kind of third and a third and a third. There's a third that really, really like it, a third that, you know, could be persuaded and have a lot of fear around it, and then there's a third who don't think it's a particularly great idea. And I've got a lot of work to do to convince them and overcome their fears and concerns about this. In terms of, if that's the agreed model going forward, then we will be quite early on looking at the training. So I've already had discussions with Monmouthshire's catering manager around what that training could look like for care staff going forward, and the rest of the team. The first job to do, there's understandably a level of cynicism from the staff team, and I think I would be the same in their position, which is this has taken a very, very long time to get off the ground, and I've been at it for about 7 years now. This is the third attempt, and we're much further progressed in this attempt, but there's a little bit, they've heard all this before, and they'll believe it when they see it. So there's an element of disengagement around that, and I completely understand that. I think critical for me is that ministerial sign-off. Once I can show them that I have the money in place, I think they will, you know, it's not that they're not ignoring it and not taking it serious. They are, but it's just that level of, it's been going on a long time, Colin. Once we have that ministerial sign-off, Sian's, as the lead for residential services, first task is to create a staff forum. And I talked to the team about this a few weeks ago when we did staff briefing days. And they will look in, as a team, they will look in detail at every aspect of the proposal, including how exactly the staffing model will work. And that will include scenario planning. So if we have, you know, one emergency, 2 people outside, you know, and how would the staff model respond to that? What are going to be the problems when, you know, the people who are on shift are not the best cooks in the world and never will be? How are we going to resolve that? So it has to be co-produced, and if it's to be true co-production, it has to be able to change in response to what they say. And I suspect that the staffing model will change over time.
Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. I was fortunate to attend the members' seminar, and there was an awful lot of information that you gave us there, which I thank you for. I support the project. It really is very innovative. But one question that I must ask is about accommodation for couples. I mean, it's always very, very difficult when people are separated for whatever reason. So I'm just wondering what your plans are to accommodate couples in this new structure.
As part of this came up in the member seminar as well, I believe, and it's incredibly important. So it has been discussed as well through the design phase amongst a myriad of other things. We're going to go back, we're sitting back down with the architects prior to detailed planning, again to walk through every element of the design to make sure it is exactly what we want. And as part of that, we will be looking to incorporate at least one double room within the design. So we're going to have to compromise some space elsewhere to accommodate that. You don't need a huge amount of additional space to be able to do that. but we are certainly looking to include that in there. I think if you have, we have at the moment 2 residents whose husbands come in regularly into the home, and I think, you know, in terms of people's involvement in the life and running of a home, it can still extend to being in a caring role within the care home. All the care doesn't have to be passed to the care staff. So as a natural consequence, if you're caring for somebody within a home, I think naturally you might also stay there as well. So you might not have those higher level needs of care, but it's just about being able to accommodate you in a caring role alongside your loved one. So I think it's essential that it's part of the designs, and we will look to be able to do that.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, when I looked through the details, I think you provided sort of like a staffing model of different times and different staff available. But I noticed that there seemed to be a gap between 10 o'clock at night and 7 o'clock in the morning, and I would have thought it would have been helpful to at least have one member of staff around during that particular period, in view of the fact of the multiple needs that you're actually dealing with. I appreciate that people have these pull cords and alarms and so forth, but you know, I would have thought that just even one person as a skeleton staff would have been helpful. The second question is really, and again, I'm afraid I'm going on about the car parking as well, is that the pavilion, when if you have a care home that's got a number of activities going on, then obviously you want to attract people from outside the, you know, from the community as well. In terms of the use of the pavilion, I mean, one of the things that dementia sufferers enjoy going to is activities like singing for fun, which is like a group activity, not just a householder type of activity. And you know, I do know of somebody who's got dementia who actually goes along to table tennis because of the fact that it's sort of almost, you know, if you throw a ball at somebody, their natural reaction is to catch it, you know. So in a sense, you don't want to limit the type of activities that can be undertaken by you know, restricting it to a sort of like a householder type of community. And I just wondered if you'd thought about expanding those type of activities to obviously you know, what plans there were for the use of the pavilion. I mean, there might be a coffee shop or hairdresser or something of a different nature, but I just wondered whether there was sort of facilities within that for a sort of a central place where people from the different households could gather together for different type of activities. Because obviously, if you're in a house, if you want to have normal living, you do actually go out to different activities that take place. And I just wondered what consideration had been given to that social side of dementia. Thank you.
In terms of the staffing, the night staffing, yeah, I apologise, it's not clear in the report. The detail in the report is given around the daytime care staff to illustrate the difference it makes when you move from a traditional model to a household support model, and it's to demonstrate the increase in staff ratios. In terms of between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m, there are 4 waking night staff based at the home, and there is also the team lead who sleeps in. So there's the availability of 5 staff. Each member of night staff will work as part of, it will be based in one of the households. The design, the households are designed to be interdependent, so at night we would open up the central corridor between the households, and that allows, at the moment we're locked into their separate wings, so the staff are not allowed to move. So they have to permanently base themselves on those wings. So we now have 5 waking night staff at Seven View, which is a much higher proportion than you would ever see in residential care. This new model allows us to move to 4 and allows movement between the households. So you could effectively have 3 members of night staff in one household if there were particular issues, which is not something we can do now. But ordinarily, 1 member of waking night per household plus a member of staff sleeping in.
Can I just come back? Yes, that I don't think it's actually said that in the report, so it'd be useful if a report goes to council, if you could add that bit, because when I read through it, I was a bit concerned about, you know, the absence of staff during the night time. Thank you.
Do you want
the social side as well.
Oh, answer to the social side.
Yeah, the council picks up on a very important point, and the pavilion has 2 purposes. One is a sense of destination, and so that's purposeful movement by residents. So it's the idea that somebody, in effect, is going to put their hat and coat on to go somewhere. So the pavilion is a multifunctional space. So one day it might be a hairdresser's, it'll always be a shop in the morning, it might be a coffee shop at some point, and it might be a place for events and concerts, etc. It's primarily a space for the residents and the households to create that sense of destination, but it is important that it is also equally accessible by the local community. So we see it as a shared space, and there are also potential benefits going forward that that shared space could be a place for social enterprises. So could somebody from the local community set up a hairdresser's in there that's for use by residents, but also by the local community as well.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, when this is built, it's obviously going to be a fantastic care home facility down in the south, which is a long way down, and we've got the middle of the county and the north of the county to think about. Can you outline the existing provision and how that will be in the middle and the north, and how, if at all, that will be affected by this provision when it's built down in the south?
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Just to say that obviously this is re-provision of an existing provision that we have, and I think we've tried to underline that. But I completely understand what you're saying in terms of, you know, actually we're going to have excellence. We're going to have this lovely, you know, flagship home in a part of the county. One of the reasons that we remain and want to remain as a provider in the market, I mean, a number of the local authorities don't run care homes anymore. Some do. We've always maintained that we want to remain an element of the market. And part of that, in a sense, because we are afforded, to some extent you could argue that we're afforded some luxury by the terms and conditions of our staff, by the fact that we've been an existing provider and that we've been afforded this opportunity to move forward into an innovative brand, if you like, means that actually we can be a shaper of the market to some extent, and that's not to undermine the great work that goes on in nursing homes and residential homes in Monmouthshire today, but we have taken a particularly strategic approach to particularly supporting people with dementia with excellent care. So as much as, you know, I'd quite like to see this model replicated, be it through our hands or be it through others potentially taking a lead from this model and thinking that's the way to design care for the future. I mean, you know, just thinking about where your constituency is. I mean, obviously there's a care home that's just recently been built. In fact, it looks like it's about to open when I went to McDonald's the other night. As I went to the tip, it's an odd place, isn't it? Anyway, so, but it looks very smart, but it is not the sort of model of support that we're looking to build here. This is familial, this is domestic. That's more the type of provision that I think providers find themselves looking to put in place because of the cost and the profit margin. So I think that's going to be a 70-bedded care home in the north. Now, obviously, that's predominantly nursing care. We're in the market for residential care, and we are a low placer of residential care places as well. And in the county, we don't have a huge amount of places. And partly that's because actually we're very good at supporting people in the community for a long time. So Sevenview represents a bit of what we need in the market. Do we need one in the central and one in the north? probably not in terms of the amount of provision that we have accessible. Would we like one? I suppose we might say we would, but that's not what we're here to debate today. So I hope that answers in some way, Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, apologies to everybody for my very late arrival this morning. I did mention to you, Chair, before the meeting, when I was giving you my apologies, that I've got an issue around the wording of the recommendations. Could I mention that now? I think that in that we're charged with scrutinising. Our work is made a little easier by clear recommendations, and I keep banging on about it, and I make no apology for that, because I think that the recommendations are a very important part of helping us to do our job of scrutiny. And I think the recommendations under part 2 of the report here, 2.1 and 2.3 are not recommendations. 2.1 is a request, and 2.3 is just a statement. 2.2 is potentially a recommendation, but I would have thought that the recommendation should quite simply have been that members consider the various options outlined in this report and come to a conclusion. And I think that would have given us a far greater steer as to what we were expected to do this morning.
Thanks for that. It's a good point. I mean, at the start, we kind of summarised that the recommendation was for us to scrutinise this final option and to recommend it to go to then full council with any considerations or recommendations we have to add to that report. But yeah, no, that was a good point.
I'm sorry, Chair.
No.
I accept fully I'm a pedant.
And just to say, you were late because you did have another important meeting to go to under your other role, so that's fine. One more question before summary.
Yes, thank you. I think, in defence of the recommendations, 2.1 does suggest scrutiny of the proposals and options within this report. So it has actually outlined that. So just a little bit of officer support there. The other thing that I would like to add to the recommendations, if the committee and chair agree, is about further consideration of car parking, access to the site, and car parking and public transport. Thank you.
Yeah, no, there you go. You've definitely got the message overall. I think people are very supportive of the project, and there are a few sort of recommendations, partly to support you in what you're doing as well. So just to try and summarise what everybody said here. Councillor Harris, you raised the idea of we need to use the opportunity to get from a 32-bed to a 48-bed. And again, I think you've taken that on board, and that's in your thinking anyway. You also, Councillor Harris, raised the Seven View site and hoping to get more than this 700k. But again, that's you've considered that, and that's been addressed, and you're happy with that. Councillor Pavier talked about meaningful partnership working with the Health Board in particular, and you were happy with the sort of the answers from that, and also concerns over, I guess, political changes and the impact on receiving that money. And I guess at the minute we don't have 100% assurance that the ICF funding will come, but fingers crossed you're ever hopeful. So everybody fingers crossed, okay. Councillor Brown, two areas she raised. First, parking facilities and public transport. And if we could put something down there that to highlight that is a concern. and kind of recommended that that really gets looked into. Totally accept Colin's dilemma, really, is trying to get that balance between space for cars and space for people, basically, to get that balance there. And obviously the detail of that will come up in planning when we looked at detailed planning, so just make sure we are aware of that when that comes up there. I think also the other recommendation is just really to make sure that in the report we've got the information on the night shift, just for when it goes to full council, so that that bit of information isn't missing from that report. Councillor Edwards, again, very supportive of this, likes the idea of the animals and the cats, and I think Councillor Edwards is very aware of what it's, not what it's like, but you've got experience of others living with dementia. And again, you're fully in support of not just the design, but also the method and the philosophy around the method of care that will be going on in this new establishment. And then Councillor Harris again just raised, we need to know the bigger plan, what investment is going to go in the north. And I know we're just looking at Crick Road now, but I think it's all of our responsibilities to be saying, right, what next? What's the blueprint for Monmouthshire, particularly now we've got the LDP coming up. So if you could stay around with us for another 7 years, Colin, to take the next phase forward. No, okay. Because we do recognise that it's taken 7 years to get where we are now. And I think it's easy just to do the same, but obviously you don't take the easy route. You're wanting something new and different based on new evidence and research around in providing better care. And the other recommendation raised by Councillor Woodhouse is just again, and something you are already aware of, is accommodation for couples, to make sure that's included there somewhere. So really, coming back to the recommendations, are we happy, summarise, are we happy for this with those comments to go through to full council? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at going on from what Martin was saying, pages 9 and 10 with the three options there, the electronic pages, and option 3, MCC work in partnership with the wider site development to construct its own residential provision. I think that's really the one that we should be highlighting to go forward.
And I think that's the thing. There was 3 options there, and the detail is for option 3. And I think pretty much we're saying that's the option we do want to go for. Yeah. So, are you proposing that and second and vote? Everybody happy with that for it to go forward? Unanimous? Fabulous. Okay. There we are. Thank you. Just before you go, Colin, even Julie. Just really to say, I'm aware that there's a lot of hard work that's gone into this, and as I say, just reproducing the same is an easy option, but you didn't take the easy option, and it, changing people's ideas is a hard battle, and changing that culture. And I have to say that your role in just ensuring that you are ensuring that Monmouthshire is continually leading on good care, and I think other authorities are looking towards us. For that innovative way forward. And I will say this again because I really like this statement, and something that we should take on as a council, really. And it is, we are with people and not doing to or for people. I think that definitely should be a strapline for Monmouthshire County Council. Thank you. Last word from Councillor.
Yeah, I just wondered, the problem is of not including our comments within it. Sorry, Chair. The problem of not including our comments within the recommendations is they could just get drowned as part of the minutes. So I just wondered if...
Yeah, no, I think, sorry, just to clarify, so those recommendations are raised because they're really important. That's why I've made sure that it'll be added to the report as our comments when it comes to full council, so they don't get missed off and they're not just part of the minutes, absolutely. Yes.
Yep, some of you might have noticed that we've actually changed the style of reporting that goes forward for decision making. So under the consultees section, when a cabinet member or cabinet take a decision, they will see the scrutiny chair's conclusion. So you'll notice that scrutiny chairs are doing really good full summaries of the conclusions of the committee, and in that we will put the actual chair's summary, will be saying which way the committee recommends, but it makes sure that the decision maker has a clear understanding of what the select committee said when they spent several hours scrutinising something. Okay.
Just while I'm waiting for Hazel to come back. So the next report is the Gwent homelessness strategy. And I think with this, basically we're looking at 3 options, and one option is to have no strategy at all. Well, we're not going to be accepting that, are we? Because we do like our strategies and forward planning and future proofing here in Monmouthshire. The second is a Monmouthshire-centric strategy, so we just do it for Monmouthshire. And then the third option, which is in Appendix 1, I think, is the Gwent strategy. So I guess our discussion is around considering the pros and cons of going Gwent wide, and for us to ask questions and agree for the recommendation for it to go through to, looking at it, to agree a recommendation to full council to accept and adopt this draft Gwent strategy. So that's our kind of target, our aim, our purpose for today. Do you want to say a few words though, Stephen, before questioning? Questioning?
Yeah, you just went through the... Thank you very much and good morning. Just a little background on homelessness, and I'm sure you're all aware that homelessness can have a devastating effect on families and also on society as well. And homelessness really is quite a complex issue. There's no single magic bullet to cure it. There are many, many various issues that can contribute to the homelessness situation for that family. I mean, if you look at homelessness in general, and you look at the issues that can be involved, it can go from affordability issues, employability, mental health issues, lack of affordable properties within the county, high rents, LHA rents, the housing benefit issue, the discrepancy between rents and a housing benefit. So there's a myriad of reasons that can affect, or can I say, contribute to homelessness. We also have, as well as a statutory duty, to be able to address those issues and reduce the homelessness within, certainly prevent homelessness within the county. And that duty is found under the Housing Act in 2004, Housing Act Wales 2014. Now, given the complexity of homelessness, it was decided around about late summer last year that due to the complexity, we maybe want to tackle this. And I think this is unique in Wales, although I will be, I stand to be corrected, that we would do it as a joint, not a joint, but a collaborative enterprise with the 5 other authorities in Gwent, and tackle it Gwent-wise. It may or may not be, for me, it seems that because of those complexities, we need to combine resources across Gwent, and tackle homelessness that way. So basically, 5 authorities got together, the leads on homelessness got together and decided that that would be the best way to tackle it. And then we employed a regional research officer who basically then went out, did the research on homelessness within Gwent and within each local authority, and that was being produced and has been appendix to the report today, and his findings. What also is unique as well from his findings was that he's produced, and was agreed by us all, a one-page strategy. Again, I think that's unique throughout Wales as well, rather than having a huge document. Although, to be honest, and you've probably seen what's behind it, there's a massive document then of the review document that sits behind it. So there's a lot of work gone on behind that one page. But that one-page document basically has come up with 4 priorities and 10 strategic options. We've also consulted to arrive at that document, we consulted quite widely. I was going to say wildly then, but I think it's widely. We might have done. We over the period of time, we've consulted, and we had a consultation exercise. It was in early spring this year, just before the snows fell, at the Pontypool Leisure Centre. And we looked at over 25 themes. It went out to all manner of our support providers, and it was a very well-attended event. And that is the results of that are encapsulated in the review document as well. And that went and formed the strategy. We also consulted with various supporting people and homelessness planning groups within the local authorities. So we've consulted far and wide, and basically this is what has been produced from that. In terms of whether this the way forward, it shows a collaboration. I think this is such a wide and complex issue that collaboration is needed. And we really, by the collaboration then, is the pooling of resources, not just resources, but the skill sets within those, because we can all bring different skills to the problem. And as you can see, I mean, our skill sets would be slightly different because of a semi-rural authority to say skill sets based in the towns and centres. And we also know that the larger authorities and those in the larger towns, they have a far greater resource that they can pull on to help them address homelessness. Homelessness is not going to go away. There are challenging issues coming down the line. We know now that universal credit has just been rolled out in the county. That is going to, if we look at the pathfinders just previous to that, that causes some problems. We know that we're still having issues with, to a degree, the removal of the toll fees and are going to create problems in accessing the private rented sector. We know that lots of landlords are pulling out of the private rented sector within Monmouthshire. So we need, I think, to be able to address these issues collectively rather than as singly. And I think that would...
This is my fault. Could I get you to introduce yourself, really, just for people looking in, and your role, and also for you as well? Thanks.
I'm Stephen Griffiths, and I'm the Strategy and Policy Officer for Housing.
Hi, I'm Ian Ferguson. I'm a Housing Options Officer. I'm here to help Steve in times of trouble.
Questions.
Ian will give the day-to-day if there's ever issues surrounding Monmouthshire on that's happening currently, if needs be.
And Councillor Val Smith's also here. So again, you're always welcome to ask any questions, Val. Open to questions then.
Thank you. Good morning, Steve. When people become homeless through perhaps no fault of their own, they've lost their job, it can be sort of even professional people, they can be on all walks of life, can't they, that come into that situation. And I suppose society is more mobile, as you say, go over different authorities or whatever. Is there a fact, though, that because the demand is getting higher than for housing, and as you say, there's more and more homeless, that private landlords are sort of upping their game to it's more or less unaffordable for a lot of people to rent in the private sector now, that's causing more issues then with homelessness?
Oh, that's certainly a factor. I mean, I think it's within that document as well, and it certainly is borne out by some of the research I've done for previous reports, that the discrepancy between housing benefit and market rents can be as much as up to £100 a month. Now, that has a huge bearing on a household being able to access the private rented sector. There are other challenging issues within the private rented sector, such as landlords not wishing to rent their properties out to certain clientele. That can be an issue as well once they know they're homeless. Some of that, though, would also, they're unable to do so because of their mortgage requirements. But certainly the private rented sector is very hard to access in Monmouthshire. We've introduced what we call the Monmouthshire Lettings scheme service, and trying to get landlords on board to work with us, and that's proving now to be quite successful, but we still need more. The other issue with housing, with the rented sector in Monmouthshire, is that it's also classed as a, and I have to take this from Home Search, is it Home Search? Yeah, it is Home Search. Sorry, Shirley. It's that it's an inactive, it's classed as an inactive market. That means to suggest that there's not much churn in the market. So not many houses come in, and then not many houses become available. So it's a very static. So that also contributes to a lack of affordable housing within the private rented sector. But we are introduce schemes, and we're continuing to introduce schemes to get those landlords on board.
Sorry, do you sort of have any sort of availability of private landlords for single people, like renting a room or anything like that that you hear about?
There is a scheme out there, and we are actually looking into it, called shared lodgings. And I'm going to struggle to answer this, Ebony, because I'm not too au fait with it. But there are schemes that we try to get landlords on board to share for lodgings, so that they could take younger single people and bring them on. And also there are schemes out there that, again, we're looking to look at, and that's when you have trying to have like a befriending, is a type of befriending type of setup, a lodging setup. But as with Monmouthshire, again, it's being able to attract them. We need to attract those landlords to work with us. And it's about, I suppose, incentivising them to be able to do that. There are landlords out there, you could say, have a sort of altruistic outlook, and we welcome them, but we also then have to work with those that need to be convinced in a way that it isn't an issue coming and working for Monmouthshire, or working with, not so much Monmouthshire, working with homeless people, because there's a perception sometimes that homeless people can be extremely difficult because they can't always.
Ian wants to give some support.
Yeah, just to come back on that. After the bedroom tax came into play, there was a feeling that spare rooms could be tapped into through homelessness, which basically fell quite flat, as Steve said, due to the nature of the clientele that we work with. The altruistic view may be there, but when the reality sets in, I think a lot of people kind of change their mind about the situation. Also, from the previous comments about private landlords, Monmouthshire suffers from a lack of what I would describe as career landlords. Most other authorities have landlords who carry a large stock of properties, particularly in larger towns and cities. Monmouthshire has a predominance of landlords who maybe have one property that they've inherited, or maybe they've put the neck on the line and, you know, entered into an agreement for one buy-to-let property. Those properties will often be managed then by agents. The career landlords are the landlords who have a portfolio of dozens of properties, who are actually committed to managing those properties as well. So agents are far less likely to accept housing benefit claimants and less likely to work with us, with the clientele that we deal with so often.
Can I just ask you just to expand? I've got a little message through here. Could you comment on any other challenges that you face on a day-to-day in terms of addressing homelessness? Does that make sense?
The challenges, as Steve and your own question has implied, are very wide and varied. Not one case is identical to another. The clear issues that we do have is accessing accommodation. If there were properties sitting waiting for people, we wouldn't have people sitting waiting for properties. That's very straightforward. The main issues we have in a process from receiving an application to providing some sort of a solution are, as outlined, the impenetrability of the private sector, the affordability of properties. Steve said, you know, £100 on top of housing benefit is not, you know, not unknown. I would say that's a conservative estimate, to be quite honest. I would say that £100 is very regular. In excess of £100 is actually, you know, often seen. The problems that we would then face are issues to do with temporary accommodation, particularly provision for families. We are working very hard to try to expand our stock, but unfortunately, once that is saturated, bed and breakfast and other accommodation, which we do all we can to try to avoid, is the inevitable safety net which we have to use from time to time, and unfortunately those times, you know, are more often than we would like.
Thank you for that. Just really, there's a couple of issues that have been raised, and just to kind of remind members, in February we are going to be looking at universal credit and how that's going to impact on residents here, and also this we're going to be looking at home search as well, so we'll be looking at those areas in more depth in February. I've got Councillor Brown, then Councillor Dimmick, and then Councillor Crowcutt.
Yes, thank you. Yes, looking through the strategy, obviously a lot of work has gone into this. You know, quite a long document. I think from a sort of councillor perspective, it would have been helpful if we had sort of like a summary, page summary at the beginning. And I don't know if that's possible to put in at this late stage, or if it's already a published document or whatever. I noticed on page 214 there is sort of the summary there, which is basically the 4 priorities that come up with the mnemonic home, which I think is quite a good idea. You know, priority 1H for help improve access to suitable and affordable housing. On Appendix 4, I think it actually provides a little bit more of a, if I can find the page, it provides a little bit more of a summary, but it doesn't do so for Monmouthshire as such. And I think from that point of view, you know, if there could be a summary for Monmouthshire as such, that would be helpful. I mean, this is just in terms of the report itself, and you know, to help us with a greater understanding of it. I think the with regard to I think if I go back to page, if I can find it, the top priority, help improve access to suitable and affordable housing. Obviously, one of the issues you've got is in relation to limited private landlords, and I just wondered how you were helping to actually encourage private landlords, because obviously if they have a tenant who's working, then they might be able to pay the full rent, and you've got the difference obviously between housing benefit and so forth. But I mean, the other question is do you actually help with the deposit, because often the deposit is used if there's any damage. I think they used to call it the bond, but any damage to the property. And the other question is do you provide any rental guarantees? Because one of the concerns is about the fact that no longer can landlords be paid direct out of benefits, and there is a concern about rent not being paid and so forth. I don't think the changes that have recently happened in terms of buy-to-let actually assist, because of the fact that mortgage interest is no longer available for buy-to-let properties from 2020. Letting relief on letting your own property is going, and so there's a few changes, and stamp duty and so forth if somebody would bought a second property. So there's a lot of negatives at the moment actually stopping private landlords, not necessarily career landlords, but people who are thinking of a buy-to-let to possibly supplement a low pension or whatever, and that's not available. So in terms of a Gwent-wide strategy, are you actually considering looking at a joint venture to provide sort of joint hostel accommodation actually, and getting perhaps Welsh Government grant money to provide that sort of thing? Because that if there aren't the private landlords there, that would seem to be one type of solution that could be looked at. I don't necessarily think it's something that a local authority could take up on its own, but on a joint Gwent-wide approach, it might be something that seriously needs to be looked at. Thank you.
You're right there, Stephen. So the questions are around what we're doing to encourage private landlords, and highlighted help with the deposit and rental guarantees, and then this joint venture idea.
We have this our Monmouthshire letting service, and that's basically that will offer the landlord, within reason, that is, we try to incentivize them to come on board with us. So the incentives could be a rent guarantee. It certainly would cover not so much the bond, but the first month's rent in advance. We even allow them as well, because we realise because of this gap between market rents and LHA rates is what we want them to come in at, which is about £100 plus. We need to offer the landlord, added value. So we try to offer a service that will give that added value. The majority, so that can revolve around financial incentives, and it can also then evolve around support, landlord support, in terms of supporting the tenant in reality, but offering the tenant the support that they need in terms of to make that so that the landlord feels comfortable, taking on that tenant, and that comfortable could mean on a sort of emotional support and the tenancy support, so the traditional type, and also it would mean that in the event of a financial issue, then the rent guarantee is there, to make sure that they're not at a loss financially as well. and then, you know, looking at the property, make sure the property's properly looked after as well. So there are those incentives. We've even offered as well, knowing that this huge gap between the two means that a landlord could be, I don't know, if you look at £100, £1,200 a year then, worse off coming, you know, in financial terms. Landlords have their property as a pension or as an income, and they're going to be coming in at, you know, losing £1,200 a year, as a conservative estimate, losing £1,200, coming in at an LHA rate that we'd want them to offer, and the market rate. So we have promoted golden handshakes, where we will pay up to £1,500 a year. Sorry, up to £1,500 as a golden handshake to come with us, and plus all the other packages. Now that £1,500 golden handshake though comes with we would want then an extended tenancy. So we would be looking at, I think it's up to a year's tenancy. And we can grade it down as well. So I think the lowest we offer, and I can't remember the figures now, but you'll have to, you know, bear with me. So we could offer, say, £750 for a 9-month tenancy. So we try and incentivise them that way to say, well, you know, we appreciate the loss that you're going to be making and your concerns. This is how we hope to address those.
And I'm just assuming, Stephen, that obviously if this scheme is in place where we measure successes annually, you do the figures and you can sort of see if the public or private landlords are kind of on the increase, if we're getting more.
Sorry. Yes, I mean, you would tie that in with if the landlord comes on board and we've paid out an incentive, then the savings would be on B&B costs as well, you know what I mean? But that's a financial saving, but then the emotional saving of not going into a B is huge, you know what I mean, which you can't put a cost on. And just to run through that, you know, just to say that under our banner of MLS, which is Monmouthshire Letting Service, we're now running at, I'm just trying to copy out, we're now running at shared accommodation, we're running at 55 bed spaces that we've been able to attract landlords to. We run 45 properties under our PSL regime, which is a what's a PSL?
Private sector leasing. It's
private sector leasing.
Properties whereby we've actually got a contract from a private landlord. So essentially we are subletting that property rather than managing it for the landlord.
We have 20 managed properties on board. Now, these are properties that come in as assured short-holds, and we've either given them an incentive or we've basically looked after them, come with us. So we've got 20 units there. And obviously, right, we still got our hostel with 5 units. But as always, though, we need more. That isn't enough. And to address the issue with regarding, was it the joint? The joint. Well, yes. I mean, that's something that we've got to go into the nitty-gritty then of the action plan and deciding how we're going to develop on the action plan. It's a live document, but that is something that yes, certainly, if we're going to work regionally, that'd be one good regional action plan. That's what regional, as far as I'm concerned, what regional working is all about.
Yeah, and possibly empty council buildings as well, you know. I mean, I suppose there's a possibility of them being reutilised.
Yes.
I wasn't going to talk about my personal experiences, but after you said about house share or room let, in 2013, I was what you would class as homeless. I'd lost my mum, my family breakdown, and my mental health started to suffer. I had nowhere to live. I had no one to go to. I'd gone from running 2 businesses, being a very successful young woman, I had a beautiful 4-bedroom home, and my relationship with my partner broke down. I moved out. He refused to release any funds. And I think because of where I was, I didn't have the energy to fight for what I was entitled to. But I was incredibly lucky that I met 2 people through business, told them of my situation whilst I was between friends, distant relatives, and they took me in. And this is why I firmly believe in opening up your homes to people that are less fortunate than you. Within 2 years, I was back on my feet. I'd got a new job, which I went up the ladder in. I started to save money. I found another relationship that didn't turn out quite well, but never mind. And I got myself back. I got my old self back, but a more independent self. I think this is great. We're a partnership working scheme. Whilst I believe people should stand on their own 2 feet and flourish, some people can't, and I've been there, and it's a very dark, lonely place. I think this is great. I support what you've put forward. And I would say the home share, I used Spare Room when I started looking, and it turned out I knew the people that were offering it. They were Monmouthshire residents. It was St. Arvin, so it was a lovely location. You know, we'd go for walks. They'd offer me emotional support. I didn't want to come to the housing department within Monmouthshire. I suppose I was too proud, you know, and 3 years later, I'm one of your newly elected members. So we need to change that stigma of people that it happens to, because it can happen to anyone. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dimmick, thank you for that, because that's very brave of you to be so honest about your background. And I think it's really important, because we do look at reports, we do look at words, but it's kind of real life experiences. And there's really a heartfelt plea, I guess, for us to really push forward the home share scheme and really try and get that together and try and make it work, because it is about changing people's ideas and the culture. And it deals with isolation and loneliness and all that kind of thing. So thanks for that. Do you want to come back on that in any way, Stephen?
Concur with.
Yeah.
With Councillor
We're all in agreement.
Difficult to follow that, Councillor Dimmick. In other places, I've spoken about economies of scale and moving to recreate Gwent in as many words. So yet again, we see another example of that proposed strategy here. It makes a lot of sense to me. And particularly a response that we've had from officers this morning about the lack of big landlords in Monmouthshire. My only concern, and I hope Stephen will be able to reassure me here, is that if we go in with the other 4 authorities, that they won't see Monmouthshire as coming in to pinch from them, because they must know that they have got more landlords than we have got. I think that recreating the old Gwent offers many advantages, but will we be welcome by the other 4 authorities in the area?
Some time ago, the housing department essentially went into partnership with Torfaen Council, and we had quite an insight at that time into how things are different, not only in the way that we work as teams, but how the public reacts to different situations. Within Monmouthshire, we have a problem geographically within our own boundaries, whereby an individual or family maybe live in Chepstow, encounter a housing difficulty, and we can only offer them property in Monmouth. That's the other side of the world to them. The notion of placing them in Abervale is another step entirely. And vice versa, the north of the county, you know, to the south of the county, is seen as a different world in a lot of people's eyes. So, whereby we are looking potentially to pinch in on those areas, as you eloquently describe it. I think the side of the things is looking at what our clientele think of that as an idea. We already, amongst our stock, as Steve has outlined, we have, is it 2 or 3 houses in Cumbraen, which are part of the house share. And that is our problem, filling those rooms. People who are homeless being offered accommodation and say, we have a room to rent for a single male. It's in Cumbraen. And often rejected simply due to the location. And that's right on our doorstep. So, although there may be that fear, I think that fear is probably, unfounded when it comes to the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I also think it's about sharing resources or the availability of support providers as well. That would concentrate in some of the larger towns, being able to then extend them out to the rural areas then.
One of the things that came out of the consultation that I've picked up on and have spoken to Ian Bakewell about, within this agreement potentially, there is scope to look at those very much niche cases, by which I would be referring to high-risk offenders, where all Gwent comes together in a lot of cases anyway under the multi-agency protection to try to suitably house dangerous high-risk offenders and so forth. A stronger agreement through such process that has been going on, could potentially strengthen that. Also, difficulties where special needs for accommodation are required is also a consideration. It's almost impossible to provide accommodation for every type of individual that could potentially at some point come our way. The possibility within a 5-area agreement to put together, accommodation for instance, somebody who is wheelchair bound with great medical concerns and so forth, has more scope than each authority providing a version of this, and there being 5 that sit empty for most of the year.
Are there any other questions before I summarise? No. Oh, yes, Councillor Harris.
It's not a question as such, but just to congratulate the author, Steve, on an absolutely, utterly and completely comprehensive report, the likes of which we don't very often see. And what isn't there is obviously not possible to put in there. It's all down there, and if we need to find it, it's in there. I was really impressed, and long may we continue to receive reports like this. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Oh, go on. Yeah. Go for it, Stephen. Yep.
Well, thank you for that. But I have to be honest, that isn't my piece of work.
I would have just taken it, Stephen. Just stayed quiet and nodded your head.
Well, this is probably going out on YouTube now, and the author now is probably listening in. Well, I should have mentioned, as part, when we got together as 5 groups, 5 authorities, and we decided that the way forward is to do this collaboratively, we then went out and we appointed a research officer, and the research officer, by the name of Chris York, was the author behind the review, and it is an extremely detailed piece of work.
So if you're looking in, Chris, thanks a lot. Good report.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I'd just like to, we've been given 3 options, and I'd just like to propose as a committee we accept option 3, the Pan Gwent option.
I'm happy for that. You happy for me to summarise, and then I'll get you to propose again? Is that okay? Oh, Pavier, Councillor Pavier, and Mark Ann wants to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'm obviously interested in the health and social care element behind this, and obviously there's the linkage. I mean, while the strategy has been driven by the Housing Act 2014, there's obviously strong linkage to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and given the potential changes to Part 9 and having housing representation on the regional partnership boards, it's going to be interesting to see how that linkage happens. In terms of sharing resources, Steve, are we talking about potential Section 33 agreements with other authorities, partnership authorities in pooling funding, or is it how are we looking at those? Is it just the fact that we need an emergency placement and that's in Newport, and we've got to move people there for in the short term. I'm just interested in that.
I'm going to have to show my ignorance here now, and I'm not sure what a Section 33.
Sorry, and under the 2006 Health Act, Section 33 is allowing the delegation of powers between authorities to do different things. If you don't know, if you can just find out and drop me an email, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's
I've got no
fine.
problem
Yeah,
with that. Yeah.
fine. Unless Mark, you've got anything.
No, I think, Chair, that's possibly more under the health side of things, so maybe more along the lines of the niche cases that Ian mentions. Unless you're meaning is there a kind of a Housing Act equivalent. I don't think there's a requirement in the Housing Act, but it is, this whole piece of work is about some of that joint working and trying to come together when we have those difficult cases.
It's probably those difficult cases, Mark, particularly when there's mental health involved, and there's inference here about discharge and prevented delayed discharge from hospital. But I'm just interested. I mean, if you can just find out and drop me an email, that'll be great. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, sorry, this might be part of your summing up, but Councillor Brown asked about some kind of Monmouthshire bespoke summary. I was having a flick through the report as members were talking. There's loads of tables in there, especially Section 5, with Monmouthshire data. I'm not sure quite what it would tell you just as a Monmouthshire column on its own, or which bit you want to pull out. So I guess I was just after a bit of a steer. Is the summary something you'd like for the council report? And are there any particular things that you wanted in it that we can try and pick out for you? It is a long report. We appreciate that.
I guess just opening it up to everybody. So in terms of when we put the recommendations, I've kind of been looking, are people wanting the officer to put a summary report for full council on Monmouthshire specific? Obviously, there is a summary there at the back, and we'll maybe make sure it's at the front for the Gwent strategy. Do you want a Monmouthshire summary for full council? Open to you.
Yes, obviously it's a very long and detailed report, but I think Appendix 4 provided a summary for the whole of Gwent, and it said, how many households and so forth, and I think it was 3,000 plus households or something. I think it would be useful to have sort of like an A4 one that perhaps summarises the Section 5, in other words, what this is the Gwent picture and this is the Monmouthshire picture, so maybe even just a one-page thing would be helpful, because that does actually go through, unfortunately my laptop keeps knocking me out of the agenda, but just from memory on that, if you did look at Appendix 4, it did give a sort of a general one for the whole of Gwent, but it would be useful if we had a similar sort of thing for Monmouthshire as well. I'm not saying take away the Gwent one, but I'm saying maybe Appendix 4 should be more at the front of the report before the 160 pages, and then you find a summary at the end, and possibly another page that just details some of the summary of the information in, I think Mark had mentioned in section 5. Thank you.
Are people happy with that? So the idea you have a summary, is that all right? Because I guess it's just putting the headlines really on one sheet of paper so council can just see at a glance and how it kind of links in with the Gwent-wide strategy. And I guess it's just making sure Appendix 4 is at the front of the report really. Because, yeah, it's... Just summarising again the points people have raised and whether there is any comments to add to our recommendation for this to go to full council. So Councillor Brown, again, just to ensure that the summary then is at the front, but also possibly to just highlight the idea of exploring joint ventures, for example, a joint hostel provision, region-wise, and you've said, Stephen, you're already looking at that, but again, it's just to highlight that's something that we've raised to support you to do that, really. Councillor Edwards opened up the discussion on our concerns that there is a lack of private, there's a low private rented sector, that there's a lack of housing through that, and that encouraged debate in that area. And you, Stephen, said that you incentivise private landowners. And again, I think for us to keep an eye on that and how that is working, that kind of comes back to us through the normal kind of... do you do an annual report, or does it come to us every 2 years when you're kind of updating us on those things? Annual's fine. Yeah, that's fine. But it's just obviously just to highlight, because it is a concern. We've raised it, and we just kind of want to know if that scheme is working and whether we are getting an increase of private landowners in the area getting on board. Is that right?
Noted.
And the other recommendation, I think, a plea from Councillor Dimmock, just that we do really make great efforts to push a new way of this home share scheme. And I think kind of looking at a strategy and progress on that as well, I think. So that just doesn't get lost, because it is an idea, and I think to really kind of push that through as a way forward. Oh, yes. Councillor Growcut, interesting question, sort of the debate of we're working in partnership and maybe the professionals might want to work in partnership and cross-border, but it's just our clients we're working with, and whether they want to move out of Monmouthshire or people want to move in Monmouthshire. And I think it's fair to say people might consider Monmouthshire as their home, and they don't really want to live in Newport or Cwmbran. So that's a difficult issue, but to be mindful of that. And I think, and we've already, yes, as say Councillor Harris raised, it is a very comprehensive report, and I say it is very well put together. So, to finalise then, and going back to Councillor Growcut, so are we happy with those comments to recommend this to go to full council on the 20th? And that is proposed by Councillor Growcut, second by anybody? We'll have Councillor Edwards, and then vote. Everybody happy? Unanimous? Fabulous. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks to both for answering our questions. Thanks a lot. Shirley's got a presentation she needs to kind of set up, a couple of minutes. I don't know if you all want to go for a quick 2-minute break, people, while she's setting up. Okay, well, that's fine. Thank you, everybody. So this is the final report of the day, and this is the local housing market assessment. And just before Shirley Wigan presents her information, just again for us to be clear on what we're looking to do today. And so the purpose is really for us as a select committee to look at this, and I think Shirley is seeking our approval for this to go to the Welsh Government. So the final report, are we, happy for this to go to Welsh Government? And do we recommend that this goes to Cabinet? And if it goes to Cabinet, we just ensure that we add any suggestions, further recommendations, or highlight any concerns that they need to be aware of. Is that okay? And over to Shirley, who, by the way, has got a sore throat, just so bit hoarse.
Sorry, apologise in advance. Oops. All local authorities are required to undertake a local housing market assessment. We have to do this every 2 years. It used to be a planning thing, but it's now, since the latest Housing Act, it's now fallen on housing to do it. They're a crucial part of evidence for preparing local plans and housing strategies. There's a very strict guidance on how these have to be undertaken, so we follow a step-by-step guide produced by the Welsh Government. One really good thing about doing it this way is that because you've got to go through so many steps and look at so many different things, you do end up with a very good idea of your housing market. Oops. It's not moving forward. That's it. Right. Average house prices in Monmouthshire have really shot up since the reduction of the toll, and we expect them to continue to do so when the toll's removed. In September, it was 307,600 as the average house price, and that's really high compared to the rest of Wales. This is just an indication of all the different wards for each town, and you can see that they're all going in an upward spike when we did the figures in September. This is especially apparent in Caldicot. You can see most of the wards, there's a real upward spike. When I looked at, because I've got to decide what an entry-level house price is for first-time buyers, and I look at all what's for sale with all the estate agents, and there was hardly anything left for sale in the Caldicot area because they've all been sold. It's again the same for Mager with Andy. When you see a dip, that's probably not that house prices are not going up, it's just there'll be probably very few sales. The same you'll see in Chepstow. All the main towns are showing a really big rise, but Chepstow's not, but that's just because we haven't been building in Chepstow and there hasn't been much for sale. Once we start to get the Fairfield maybe site with properties, I think we'll see that a raise in that as well. I put this slide on just to give you an idea of where we sit, and you can see that we're very, very similar to South Gloucestershire in house prices, and you can see that the rest of our neighbours with Blaenau Gwent, Newport, Turvine, they're all very much lower, their average house price than we are. Also, we've had a very high house price to income ratio for quite a long time. The Monmouthshire one is 9:1, but there are some wards where it's significantly higher, such as Mitchell, Troy, and Crowcorney. When I looked, they were very high. I put this in because it's very interesting that average earnings for women have really increased. I suppose that's to do with the equality and equal earnings, but it's a very significant increase for female workers, and for the first time in 6 years, it's now above the national average. Now going on to, I look at the housing market using the Home Track Housing Intelligence System, but then we have to go through step by step to find what the actual need is by looking at the housing register, household projections, lots of different things. So we use this Glenn Bramley analogy with the bath, and the bath water is the backlog of need. That's the people already on your housing register. And then existing households falling into need is one of the taps. So that's the people who are going to become homeless. And then the newly arising need is new households forming, and we do that by looking at the census and household projections. Obviously, the plug is the supply, the committed supply, as we build. Some of the water drains out of the bath. Unfortunately, we'll never empty that bath. So we looked at the backlog of need, and there were 2,079 households on the register in bands 1 to 4 when I did this work. That gives an annual figure of 415.8 per year. But that's before we add all the things like lets and committed supply. We then look at low-cost home ownership. That gave an annual figure of 18. Now, that's not going to be completely accurate because the way our register runs, we don't ask the questions we need to ask, and we're addressing that for the next one. We're going to ask the proper questions. But I had to actually contact all the people on the register to find out what their needs were, and as you can imagine, I didn't get many responses, so I had to write and email and telephone and to try and get responses. So I think that figure should be a little bit higher. Probably, I would think about 30, probably, if I'd managed to get enough responses. We have a very small need for intermediate rent, looking at the people on our register. I'm sure you're aware there's a lot of very low earners on our register, and intermediate rent figures would be local housing allowance or 80% of market rent, and they simply can't afford that. If they were having their housing paid by housing benefit, then they could afford it, but a lot of the working households on a low wage can't afford it. These figures are the existing households falling into need. This is done by looking at how many households have been homeless in the last 5 years and then projecting forward, and also looking at repossessions. That's how we come up with that. This gives the gross need for all the different types of the social rent, LCHO and intermediate rent. And then we have to factor in how many lets we have in a year. We look at the last 3 years of lets, and then we project that forward for 5 years. Lets run about between 400 and 500 a year. We also look at the committed supply that we have coming forward for the next 5 years. So this is giving a figure of 284 a year for low-cost home ownership. However, we need to treat this with caution because that's arrived at by looking at all the earnings of everyone in Monmouthshire through the khaki paycheck model. And then I have to do a lot of work on house prices, rents, and I have to see how many people can afford the market, how many people can afford intermediate rent theoretically, how many LCHO, and then how many social rent. Historically, that figure would always have been very high, and we've no way of knowing how many of those households will actually approach the council for assistance. In the past, it's not that many. I think there's about 40 on the list at the moment. There's hundreds who say they would like to buy, but if you look at how much they earn and whether they've got savings, they're never going to be able to buy. But of the people who could buy, it's never been anything like as high as that. Many of these people will probably access Help to Buy once our sites come forward and there's more new build houses for sale. The private developers will all be offering Help to Buy. rent to own is coming online, although we've not been very successful at doing that in Monmouthshire. Lots of people have help from parents, so we really need to just look. We are going to provide more low-cost home ownership than we have been doing in the past, because I think there is a need for more, but I think that we just need to be cautious about that figure. Again, with the intermediate rent, there is a need in Monmouthshire for intermediate rent, but there are not people on our register. So if we were to provide a lot of intermediate rent, we would our housing association partners would have to go to estate agents and advertise there, and we wouldn't be taking the people off our register, which isn't really what we need to be doing. The need per annum for social rent has come out at 102. So the total shortfall per year for the next 5 years is 468, but that is skewed by that very high low-cost home ownership figure. That's the end. Any questions?
It's interesting you saying that the bathwater analogy, and we're never going to empty that bath, so we're always chasing our tails, I think. Councillor Harris.
Once again, nice comprehensive report, Shirley. Can we have those slides? Because I'm fascinated with the breakdown of housing in particular areas as well, and it just sums up how almost impossible it is to. In fact, I don't know how the county keeps going, but obviously people do come in and people do get to the bottom of the ladder. I never quite understand how, but it just shows how difficult it might be once those bridge tolls come off. It's just got to get worse, I would have thought.
Yes, thank you. Could you just explain what intermediate rent need means? Because I'm not quite clear on what that. Social rent presumably is, sort of 100% RSL type of rent, but I may have got that wrong. But just if you could explain the terms. I thought the looking through the appendix on the report, it was very, very comprehensive and well written. The only thing that I would have liked to have seen, and I did have a bit of confusion when I was looking at the tables, is could at the bottom of each table you put down just to remind people what LCHO means and what all the other I think there was a IR, which I presume is intermediate rent, but if you're looking through a report and you see tables headed with these different things, obviously you're used to those terms, but people who aren't used to those terms, it's difficult to actually comprehend the tables themselves. So just a little extra bit on the end, if the report hasn't been fully completed, would be very, very helpful if that's still possible, if it's still a draft, presumably. Thank you.
Yes, I can easily do that. Social rent is what we also know as benchmark rent, and those rents are set by the Welsh Government. Intermediate rent is anything in between that and market rent. It's normal to charge about 80% of market rent for an intermediate rent. We do try to keep any that we do at or slightly below the local housing allowance, but that's so that people in housing benefit would be able to access them. Our partner RSLs do some intermediate rent from properties that they're buying themselves, but the majority it would be social rent.
Thank you, Chair. I always get terribly depressed when we're looking at this sort of figure, and I think those of us who are elected members and hope to do some good within their communities. It's when you see the demands that housing is such a basic human need, isn't it? And just to open it out slightly, members of the committee will remember the leader of the council in County Council a couple of months ago talking about the fact that the council is now looking at setting up a company to build itself. And I think that I would like to see a very clear recommendation from this committee going forward that we would support that as a very important way in which we can at least do our bit as a council to try to reduce the housing shortage.
Yeah, Chair, thanks. I suppose I was just going to pick up on probably the exact thoughts you're already having, which is how all of this links into the emerging local development plan and the work. I mean, many of you here are on planning committee anyway, but it is a well-recognised challenge. The figure, when I was reading Shirley's report, the figure of 468 affordable homes per year is frightening in the context that we only build at the moment about 250 a year in total, market and affordable. I mean, obviously there's the caveats in there that Shirley's explained about that actual figure, and some of those people, would never actually materialise because of, bank of mum and dad or moving elsewhere. But I guess the flip side to that is we've also spoken in this select committee and in others, economy and development in particular, around our economic and our demographic challenges. And some of those people who potentially don't appear on our housing register because they'll just move to a neighbouring county and buy something cheaper are probably in the 20 to 40s working age group that, for our economic and demographic purposes, are exactly those people that we'd like to try and retain. So some very real challenges, I think, ahead. The idea that we'd ever hit that number, I think we've got to be honest with ourselves, we won't. If you imagine that we just have a 30% policy, for example, delivering 1,200 odd homes just to get 460 odd affordable per year, we're nowhere near that league, and that would just be unrealistic and unsustainable for the county. So there's a lot of thought got to go into the next local development plan, how we balance these really competing objectives. I guess the other flip side again is some of the bits we were talking about earlier around the turnover of affordable properties in relation to homelessness, and even what Shirley's talking about now with the house prices, are directly a result of some of the strengths of the county. So it's a beautiful place to live and very accessible, albeit almost all by car. But they are some of the things that push our house prices up. And in terms of the turnover of affordable housing being relatively low, in terms of community cohesion, that's brilliant. In terms of people being stuck on the waiting list, that isn't brilliant. So obviously we'd like to keep the turnover low in that sense, and those people who need housing are there and happy with what they've got. But then we need to get more in the plug hole end of Shirley's bath analogy.
Can I just say the backlog of need is a huge issue with all local authorities, and everyone that's done this assessment has come up with a very high number of the bathwater and the backlog, the people on the waiting list, and no one can successfully address that. It's just too high a number.
Councillor Harris, I know you haven't put your hand up, but there was a conversation we had earlier. Didn't know if you wanted to ask a question about affordable housing and what does affordable mean? Do you want to ask that?
Sorry, yes. Sorry, I'll do that again. What does affordable mean?
Well, it means housing that people who can't access housing on the open market and get themselves into housing, they need assistance. It's quite a wide band. It incorporates social rent, intermediate rent, and the low-cost home ownership and shared ownership if we did it. So it's to cater for anyone who can't afford either a market rent or to buy a house on the open market.
Chair, do you mind if I...
Sorry, carry on.
Do you mind if I just top up Shirley's answer in a sense of, again, I think thinking of the next local development plan, this is a topic we'd really like to discuss probably both with yourselves as Adult Select Committee and also the Economy and Development Select Committee is putting themselves forward to be a bit of an LDP steering group of workshops. I think to dig down into our policies and understand some of the perhaps unintended consequences of our policies and weigh up the pros and cons. For example, our policy at the moment require neutral tenure, which means everything's DQR, design quality requirements, and the ACG. So it's having a look around that. We've had a lot mentioned to us recently around how's it working in England, how are some authorities there doing things differently and getting more. And our response to those questions, which are just being sort of on a private basis to members individually at the moment, have been around, is what England's achieving, is that really affordable housing? Low cost home ownership, for example, in some authorities they go for 80% market value. Is 80% of a house in Chepstow actually affordable? We'd suggest not, so we'd go 50%. So it's looking through those consequences. I think in due course we want to discuss that in more depth with you and go through the various scenarios. So members are fully sighted on what the policy choices are and what it means. I think what we want to avoid is ending up with a big number in terms of saying, hooray, we've delivered 100, but in reality they're not affordable or not the quality that we want.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously, we're never going to be able to house everybody. More and more people come into the county and are going to because of the bridge tolls as well. Also, we'll never make more land, which, has to accommodate more housing. And yet we're forever seeing on the television about the high streets are dying because we have out-of-town shopping, which is what everybody seems to want to do. So there is bound to be loads of buildings in these high streets and so on that could be altered, accommodated. Perhaps housing associations could buy up certain whole buildings and reorganise the layout in them and so on. And in our previous article on the agenda was homelessness, where we could perhaps accommodate them into some sort of hostels where if you're out of work, we have pictures on thinking it's somebody in a doorway in the middle of the street, with nowhere else to go. And those that are really in dire need also need to be in an environment that is near facilities and so on, which isn't any good if you're out in the countryside in a barn as a tramp. But our buildings that we've already got aren't being utilised enough, to my way of thinking, where perhaps accommodation could be altered. The council, you say, going to, have a new branch of housing facility. If they went into that sort of company, cannot they utilise some sort of grant way or a different branch, as you say, to access or purchase some of these big buildings that could be used for accommodation? Otherwise, we're never, ever going to meet our housing needs. And the majority of people on low incomes want to live in a town sort of area, because otherwise, if they live in the countryside, you've got extra expense, the facilities aren't there, very often the schools aren't there. So it's a whole big picture of trying to house people on a very small island that is getting more and more populated.
Yeah, sorry if I mentioned the LDP for third and final time this morning. Just to let members know, we recently did an internal call for any brownfield sites that members or colleagues could think of from their travels around the county. Unsurprisingly, a pretty low response rate because we aren't flush with brownfield sites. But what we're going to be doing in the near future is another call, both externally and within the council, but more about kind of urban capacity, almost an urban housing potential. So are there vacant buildings or vacant rooms above shops? I think people have possibly thought about actual bits of land that could be redeveloped rather than buildings that could be reused. So we're putting a call out there for that to help inform options. Obviously, there's a whole other hurdles about who owns it, are they for sale, etc., etc. But at least understanding some of that potential. So you've obviously all got some sites in your minds already that every now and again you glance at and think, why can't, etc., etc. So by all means, put those forward, and we'd encourage you to do so, and we can have a look at them.
In addition to the building we're doing, we have asked Monmouthshire Housing Association to buy back as many ex-right to buy properties as they possibly can get their hands on to increase the stock, and they've been doing quite well on that. We've got 12 so far this year within the Social Housing Grant Programme, and I'm going to instruct them to work a bit faster to see if we can utilise some extra money at the end of the year, but they are buying everything that comes on the market that was once a council property. They're trying to buy back houses and flats.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, looking at this, I mean, obviously you've got a social rent need, low cost home ownership need, intermediate rent need, and so forth. I just thought it might be useful if, because affordable housing is so complicated, would it be possible to sort of provide a very simple definition of what these different terms mean? And the other question I've got is that if you look at housing elsewhere on affordable housing, a lot of RSLs seem to go for these shared equity schemes, own when house prices are high, you own 50% of it, of the equity, and you pay 50% in rent, and even 25% ownership. And that seems to be predominant in areas where house prices are high. The other question is that I think, as Mark Hand has already mentioned, is that I think the last committee here we mentioned, I think Ian Bakewell was going to look at liaising with RSLs to see about accommodation above shops as being renovated, and I suppose it's at empty council buildings as well. There's a possibility there of looking at that sort of thing and them being renovated. So I just wondered if these conversations had gone on with RSLs, because I haven't really seen in Monmouthshire these sort of shared equity things coming forward. And I suppose there was, that might help in getting on the ladder, particularly in expensive terms. And I'm not really quite sure what affordable housing means, because I know in an area I was in before where house prices were quite high, there were these affordable homes on the market that were about 180,000, and yet there were terrace properties for sale in the same area for about 100,000. And I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be more affordable to actually buy a terrace property or a one-bedroom flat than some of these houses that are advertised as being affordable, whereas actually the cost of them is higher than going for existing households? And I just wondered if that had been looked at as well. Thank you.
A lot of questions. Shared equity is low-cost home ownership. That's what that is. It's a shared equity product. The other thing, shared ownership, is shared equity. You own the whole property. In Monmouthshire, it's 50-50. You've paid 50% of the price, and you get an interest-free equity loan from the RSL for the other 50%. Shared ownership is different. We don't do it in Monmouthshire at the moment. We do have some that we did in the past, but with that, you don't own the whole property. You only own the part of the property that you buy, and you can buy down to as low as 20%, I think. The Housing Association owns the other 80% or whatever, and you have then to pay rent. We did have the Housing Associations in to present to us quite a few years ago on shared ownership, because they do love that, because they're making an income from it. But when they explained it to us, you have the part you buy, and then when you pay your rent, that brings it up to almost market value. So we didn't consider that as as affordable, really. It's not an affordable product when it works in that way. So we have traditionally stuck to shared equity, which is more popular with people because they own their own house, the whole house. They can staircase up if they want to. They can staircase up to 100%. If they do that, not many do that because they're first-time buyers. They're buying a 2-bed usually. They outgrow that and they sell that and they move on to another house. But if they did staircase up to 100%, then the RSL would recycle any grant that went into that to go to buy more affordable properties. So that's how that works. With the empty properties that we discussed last time when Ian came to committee, we are going to be looking at those. And we do look at them from time to time, and if we find one that we can bring back, then we can do that with social housing grant. So if Mark is putting that call out for buildings and we do get some, then we'd be looking at that together to see if we could bring any of them forward with our RSL partners. I'm sorry, was there another question?
Yeah, just a quick one. I think what you've described in terms of, you know, shared ownership and you know, the equity situation. I mean, I think, you know, that just helps to describe how complicated this area of, you know, with the generic heading of affordable housing can be. And so, you know, definitions of them are helpful. I very much appreciate the point about shared equity is much better than shared ownership, because at least when you sell, you know, if you buy something 50% equity, then you get the 50% profit as well when it's sold. But what I don't understand is why in other areas you'll find that RSLs do advertise on Rightmove, for example, you know, 50% shared equity homes. Why don't we get any advertisements in relation to our housing in this area? And the second question is about the fact that you know, that might actually help people with low cost home ownership need if that was better advertised and the availability of it. The second aspect I wanted to raise was that you do break down a sort of ward level of affordable housing, and one of the things that has been mentioned in the homeless context is that people have a very you know, sort of narrow perspective, if you like, of what is home, you know, so that somebody in Chepstow wouldn't think that Cwmbran was home, you know. So in an authority I was in before, when they did a planning report, you know, for example, in relation to you know, accommodation in a village or something like that, they not only used provided a report on the local housing, the LHMA, which I think is a standard across England and Wales, but they also insisted on doing a local survey of what actual affordable housing need there was in a particular village or a particular locality, and we don't seem to get that sort of information, you know, so that, for example, a need in Caldicot and Chepstow isn't the same as a need in a particular village. And I think it would be helpful if we did have that additional information, because I think recently we did have a village site, and I think the chairman mentioned that they knew of other affordable housing elsewhere that wasn't part and parcel of the report. Thank you.
With regard to Rightmove, our housing association partners are only allowed to advertise on Rightmove if they can't fill the houses from the register. So because we have a common housing register and LCHO, intermediate rent and social rent, they're all on that register. We advertise all properties through Home Search, whether they're for rent, for intermediate rent, for some of the housing associations do some market rent properties, and also the low cost home ownership, and it's all advertised on there. And we try to fill from people on our register rather than market that to people through Rightmove. With regard to the homeless thing and people not wanting to move, it's more to do with access to work, I think. If people are on a very low wage and they're working in Chepstow, it doesn't help for them to be offered a house in Monmouth because they may have no way of getting to their work. So we have to consider that as well. We do a lot of community consultation when we've got village sites. That's how I come up with the mix that we're going to build, especially with the 60-40 sites. As soon as we know we have secured the land and it is going to come forward, we hold a community consultation. We invite everybody to come forward and register their need, because we find that although we have the register, if you're living in a rural area, quite often you've not put your name on there because there are no houses. And if we're suddenly going to build some, then you are in housing need, you get the opportunity to put your name on the register. We also look to see whether you could only afford a rental product or whether you could afford low-cost home ownership. Most of the sites that we've done have been a split, and that mix is based on the local need. We found that we used to do housing needs surveys a long time ago, but by the time the site came forward, came through planning, got through all its hurdles, that survey was over 5 years old, and people used that to try and get us to stop building it. So now what we do is we get fresh data. As soon as we know we've got a site, we find out who exactly is in that area, who is in housing need, what type of house they need. If there was an older person, we might put in a bungalow. If there was somebody in need of adapted housing, we could do that. So it's much more flexible, and it's current need that we look at. Obviously, the housing register, I can tell how many people have a connection to a village, because that's one of the questions we ask them, and I can run off reports. If anybody asks me for a report on how many households are in particular areas, I can do that.
Chair, just on the wider point of the planning reports, Shirley provides that information for inclusion. We certainly did it on the last two unallocated sites on the committee agenda, because that was an important part of the consideration. Yeah, it's interesting information, I suppose, on other sites. For example, Crick Road, the site's in the LDP, the principle of housing there, and the policy saying how much affordable is set. So it's more like background information than particularly influential on your on that planning committee's decision. But yeah, it is information that Shirley provides, and we were discussing just the other day about how we flag it up more in the reports. So that's something we can take away.
Just, thinking about the financial aspect, I remember the previous report was saying how, there was a Welsh Government commitment in relation to a certain number of affordable houses across the whole of Wales, and we were pleased to see how successful you were in bidding for that particular need. I'm just wondering whether or not, obviously this has to be submitted to Welsh Government, and is there an argument for arguing about extra resources needed for areas where the the housing local housing cost is higher than other areas in Wales, and therefore the need is greater? I'm just thinking about, can we start arguing and with Welsh Government and bidding for possibly saying that we've got greater need, and therefore we need greater resources from central government because of the problems that we've got, not only in building affordable homes, but also in relation to, dealing with homelessness, that you can't get as many private landlords. And one of the reasons for that is also they talk about your yield from your investment. Well, if basically the prices are high, then a landlord doesn't get as much yield from rental yield from the investment in it. So, all of these factors are arguing against a situation where we actually is creating more need in this area. And is that something that we could put forward in some shape or form in view of your experience in this area? Thank you.
The Welsh Government uses a formula for allocating the social housing grant that does take all of those things into consideration. I think that would be difficult to argue for more, because every authority is going to have this great need. What we did successfully lobby for was a raise in the ACG rates for small sites. I did argue with the Welsh Government for years that it was very difficult to bring forward the 3s and 4s that we try to do in our rural areas and getting somebody to build them because the ACG rates weren't high enough. So just this year with the new ACGs, they've brought out under 10 units get a higher rate, so that will help us in the rural areas. But lobbying just on housing need, I would think would be very difficult because every single assessment's bringing back a high level of need.
Sorry, thank you. Just one thing, when I noticed reading through that you're no longer looking at those of urgent need in Band 5. As we know, a lot of them in Band 5 haven't got the sort of same need. If you're in Band 1, you're high on the list. But in a rural area like mine, where you've got especially a lot of farms where there's generations of people living in the same farmhouse, you've got the elderly parents, the next generation, and now we're getting grandchildren. And because they're predominantly living in a large house, they tend to think, oh, well, there's plenty of room in there to either split it or whatever. So their need isn't the same. But the stress on those families isn't always taken into consideration, that they would still want to live independently, although would they then class as in Band 5 because they've got the room. But if it's in a rural allocation area, which it would be in a village, because they're in Band 5 and you've got somebody in the next village, if there's nobody else in that line of housing, would it automatically go to the next village for somebody in, say, Band 2 or 3, rather than that other person who's living in accommodation with 3 or 4 generations? Do you see where I'm coming from? Thank you, Shirley.
The people in Band 5 are all house owners. So the people you're describing wouldn't be in Band 5. They would be in a lower, higher need band. You wouldn't, if you were sharing, you wouldn't be adequately housed, so you would be in a higher band. So when we're doing the rural ones, if you're in Band 5 and you're a homeowner, you could still move if you weren't in the area that you belong to. You may still get one, but probably not because you're completely adequately housed. But if you're sharing, you would be able to bid for one of the rural properties through the rural allocations policy, because you wouldn't be in Band 5.
Sorry, any more questions before? Oh, Councillor Smith.
Just to ask, Shirley. Yes, come on. When you made the reference to the housing association being able to buy back previous council properties, presumably they're buying back at the market rate. Is there still a percentage deduction on what the person selling? It used to be you had to hold the property for 5 or 6 years, whatever, and then the price at which you sold that ex-council property was not affected. But presumably, I was just surprised that the Housing Association was being so successful in bringing these houses back in, because those houses were were spacious compared with what is now proposed for low-cost housing. So that intrigued me quite. And when we talk of housing within Monmouthshire, or whatever, yes, I can appreciate the design constraints, the quality requirements, I suppose, in some way. But we always think of bricks and mortar. There are other alternatives. As well as looking for the ground, there are other alternatives to construction that I don't think we've ever... I'm not aware of having taken place in Monmouthshire, but other places have. So just 2 questions that intrigue me.
Well, the first one, the properties we're buying back are sold on the right to buy. We haven't done any right to buys for years, so they would have been bought a long time ago, probably from the council. So that's all gone. They're just paying the market value for them. We are grant funding as many as we can. So the Housing Association only has to pay 42%. We would grant fund the 58%. If we run out of grant, the Housing Association, Monmouthshire Housing, will still buy them back, but the rents would have to be higher on any that they don't get grant for. Yeah. And your other question, I have no idea what.
Yeah, no, we do very much. I think it's fair to say look at traditional bricks and mortar type housing. I mean, I assume you're not referring to gypsy traveller accommodation. You're just referring to doing different things.
General population, general design. There are
Yeah.
some very innovative schemes out there, new materials.
The Welsh Government has got its fund for innovative housings introduced last financial year, I think, but very late in the financial year context. So we've already approved 2 schemes that Monmouthshire Housing Association is working on. So there were 4 bungalows in Abergavenny that Planning Committee recollect, and I think it was 4 probably intended more at first time buyer units in Caldecott. Incidentally, Chair, if you don't mind putting in a plug, MHA was in touch with me recently. They've arranged for those properties in Caldecott to be kept empty for 2 weeks following completion, so that interested groups can have a look around. So I've put a little flag up for Planning Committee, but I'm sure that could be extended to other members of this committee if they are interested. So some of that stuff's happening. It is looking at different construction techniques, timber frame, for example. I mean, we could have a lengthy discussion about whether that's innovative or just something that's come back from the 1960s in a little loop. But there are different ways of doing things that they're looking at in terms of faster delivery and that kind of thing. So there's various projects going on. There's a fairly well-known attempt at innovative design, but in terms of energy efficiency, called Solster House, which is, I think, is in either Bridgend or Neathport Talbot. I can't remember which now. Which I think is probably worth a visit, but I can imagine 1 or 2 faces on Planning Committee if that actual design were introduced into Monmouthshire. So it's trying to strike some of that balance. Equally, there's a different scheme which is in Neathport Talbot for energy neutral homes, which is a far more traditional type appearance of a house, which you could imagine working in some places. So the short answer is there are different approaches being looked at. I wasn't sure if you meant things like timber frame or if you're literally thinking of short-term steel containers are being used in some areas for homelessness, or static caravans. Personally, I'm not a fan of the steel container concept. It may be a very short-term solution, but if that's what we're aspiring to address the problem, it doesn't fill me with joy. No disrespect to those people promoting the schemes. I'm happy to go and visit one and see how they are working, but even if we had a kind of urban environment that would visually take it doesn't strike me as the best solution for someone's housing need if we can avoid it. Well, we'll all be in a box sooner or later. I'm just hoping for later. So there are various bits of work going on, Chair, but I guess part of the challenge is there's this really encouraging but fairly sudden announcement about funding for innovation, and it's quite hard to innovate quite that quickly. So I think we'll see more stuff and different stuff coming on stream. The funding's now open to the PLCs and the private developers, rather than just the RSLs or other companies. So I think the scope for it will increase. We'll just need to learn from the successes or failures of other schemes elsewhere and see what we can introduce here.
Thank you for that, everybody. There's a lot of questions that have opened up to further debate, and I guess there's a lot to be done in other committees, planning, economy and development, more to be done here. And I guess if you use the bath as an analogy of members' work, our bath is never emptied, is it? So just going to Councillor Harris, opening comments, just basically the presentation slides, if we could have that sent out. And I know sometimes it's difficult, Shirley, but just if members can have slides in advance just to kind of read through before presentation, it just kind of helps us. And I know we had the report as well, but because it's fascinating information. Um, Oh, you know, that's brilliant, because I was just going to go on to Councillor Brown, has just really asked if there was a key for the abbreviations and the anagrams so that people kind of understand it. Brilliant, that's great, that'll be great. And then we can print them off and laminate them and stick them all over the house so we can remember what they all mean. Like a bit of lamination. There was an interesting sort of question by Councillor Brown in terms of sort of going to Welsh Government and saying, because I guess it is unusual, our prices are higher, therefore could it be argued that our need is higher? If we were to take that forward, I don't know if that should come as a letter from us as a committee, or maybe somebody to take it through as a motion to full council for debate, and then a letter from the whole of council. So that might be something we could look at. Let's have a look. Just quick. Yes, Councillor Edwards brings this up many, many times. So, yeah, the lack of land, but to really try and reuse existing buildings and make the most of that. And again, if we could make that as a point, because it has been made before, but we just got to make sure it doesn't get lost. And I guess this will come in line with the LDP when we're looking at sort of alternative use of buildings and space. I think it's sad because it's use of buildings in high streets, and, you know, it's that balance. Do we want to bring high streets back again and make them vibrant and vital so people can use them? So that's definitely a long-term discussion to be had, really. And interesting, when looking at affordable housing as well, we're talking about the definition, and I think it was the discussion I had with Councillor Harris, and I think Councillor Brown saying the same thing. We've got to be clear what affordable actually means. Mark Hand was saying that we're looking to do some joint work, and Paul Pavier, who is Chair of Economy and Development, to do a bit of working together to look at some of these policies and defining them, and, as you say, look at unintended consequences, and not just to replicate what other authorities are doing, but to really look at, as I say, the kind of the pros and cons and the unintended consequences of those policies that we're putting in place. As I say, fairly straightforward, this agenda item. The recommendation is pretty straightforward, to recommend that Cabinet adopts the local housing market assessment. And
Chair, I wonder if you could also add to your summary the comment I made about trying to strengthen the desire of the County Council to re-enter the housing market itself.
Yes.
And build its own housing.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry about that, Councillor Grocott. I have actually got it written here and highlighted in green as well. Because of, I mean, you were depressed. You said you were depressed, and it is a basic human need, and we have to do absolutely everything within our power, if, as you like, to empty that bath. And one of those things is to push forward something that came through as a discussion in full council, that Monmouthshire County Council's company looks to build itself in order to support people in need in the area. So yeah, thanks for reminding me on that, because that was an important point. So do we recommend that this goes to Cabinet? Everybody's nodding, but does somebody want to? We've got Paul Pavier, you want to, and seconded by Councillor Edwards, and everybody hand up, unanimous, all happy. Yeah, that goes through with those sort of comments. Thank you for that, everybody, and I think that's the end. Do you want to say anything?
Just to remind members that the ordinary meeting is on the 18th of December in the morning. That will be going ahead. We have a performance report which won't take very long, and the plan after that is to have closed session training with members, and we've got some representatives from the Gypsy and Traveller Council who are going to provide some training for you. You'll recall that we had a first workshop on that, so it'll be a very short meeting followed immediately by training. Some of you are around for the afternoon. We have Economy and Development Select as well, so in for the whole day. All right. Open to all members, but obviously not live streamed. It's training. Okay. They will know about it.